Okay, perfect. So thank you, Rebecca, for joining this call. We did our spiel at the beginning where I talked a little bit about Houstory, and I wanted to get your rental story. So before we go into your story, I would just like to know, how do you identify and how would you like to be referred to you?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Rebecca Foley. Rebecca is totally fine. And I use she, her pronouns.
Is there any other parts of your identity that might be important for us to know?
Not my identity necessarily, but well, yes and no, I guess. Yeah, my husband is Asian American, and so I guess being part of a multiracial family and a family where one of the adults, not myself, is on disability. My husband. I said that's so weird. Anyway, yeah, being in a family where I'm the caretaker, and I earn the majority of the income. Yeah, those are kind of factors that will probably come into play a little bit later when we talk.
So I know we were briefly chatting during another meeting, I believe it was last week, where I let you know a little bit about what I was doing with Houstory, and you had shared very briefly that you had a rental experience that was not so great. So before we dive into that, can you tell me a little bit more about the location and about how long ago it was?
Yeah. So I lived in Minnesota most of my life until a few years ago, and during that time while I was married to my husband, we rented for about 15 years or so. Yeah, about 15 years. And our last rental experience will be the one that we will talk about. It was, we lived there for 10 years, and we lived in like the northwest part of the Twin Cities area in Minnesota.
Okay, are you currently renting now?
No, we were able, throughout the series of events, we were able to purchase a home. It's our first home, and yeah.
Can you tell me briefly about that experience with the rental process? Just sort of.
Yeah, I can just kind of tell it as a story, like from beginning to end. So when we started, my child was an infant, and we had moved from one rental place to living with my parents so that we could save up some money because we had an infant. So we lived there for about 6 months, I think. And then we were looking for our place. And the place that we chose, it was kind of a lower income rental place. I was paying, I think, a little under $800 a month. I think they raised, it was a little under $800 a month. And the place that we lived at, it was only supposed to be a 6-month lease, but it was, after that, it was month to month. So I was like, this is great. I can stay here as long as I want, basically, which we kind of did. And the thing that they kind of promised us when we started, and we maybe took advantage, they maybe felt like we were taking advantage of it a little too much, is they kind of promised us they wouldn't raise the rent.
Sorry, did they put this in writing, or did they just verbally say that, like, oh, you're here?
No, it was it was a long time ago, but I believe it was in the lease. So this would have been 2009-ish, I think, was around when this happened. Yeah, so I think it was I'm pretty certain it was in the lease. Definitely the 6 months and the month to month was in the lease. And then, and I believe the fact that they weren't going to raise the rates on the rent was in there as well. One thing that stood out to us that seemed a little weird was they made any types of clogs. It might have been plumbing overall. I can't remember. I think it was just related to clogs, but that was supposed to be our responsibility, which is a little weird and not great, but we went with it, and we would
Was this
Sorry.
in like a shared building, or was it like an
It
independent?
was a rental apartment, yeah.
So you shared pipes with other units.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one time I did clog the sink myself because I had never had a garbage disposal before, and that was on me. Yeah, but my uncle came over and snaked it for us, and I was very thankful. Yeah, so that was one thing that like stood out to us as kind of weird, and we had a few instances where we had to figure out, okay, do we handle this? Do you handle this? And then getting a plumber to come without, or well, to come out when we were paying for it versus the rental company was kind of an issue. The thing that like getting into the nightmare of living in this place, for the most part, it was fine. However, early on, we started having issues with mice. And we're not, we weren't living in a way that would attract mice necessarily. Like we weren't dirty. We weren't, I mean, we do kind of hoard cardboard boxes a little bit, but that shouldn't justify having mice in our apartment.
What millennial now, like what person now doesn't hoard some sort of Amazon box? Come on. Prime Day.
It was much like my husband who's Gen X, but I'm gonna throw him under the bus because it was we had boxes of books though. Like it was really funny because we lived there for like 10 years and we never unboxed our books. They're hard to move. Books are hard to move. Yeah, so that was kind of like the situation, and we had an on-site like caretaker. So we would go to her door and say, hey, we have this problem with mice. And she kind of would look at us like we were the issue, like, oh, you're dirty, that's why you have mice, and oh, this is your fault. But the thing too is we were on the ground floor. We were in the very back of the building, kind of in the more like remote part of the building, and there was a little like woodland area behind us. So it was a perfect little place that would attract mice. And I think they were, well, not I think, I know, they were living in the walls. We had these like big brick walls. And so these mice were just coming in and living in the walls, and they would come out to visit us, which, when you have a toddler, having little mice running around with a toddler is not great. It's not fun. And I ended up developing a phobia of mice because of all of this, because they jump out of nowhere and then they're just down there by my feet. Yeah, it's freaky. My husband,
mice are particularly devious too. And a practice that I started because I lived in Brooklyn for a number of years. I still to this day will have all of my rice and my cereal in either thick plastic, or we'll have them in glass jars, especially the ones on the floor, because they get into that stuff and sometimes you don't even know. And then it's like counters, especially with a baby, they're putting things in your mouth. Like yeah.
And my kid would just play in the living room, so his toys were there. So we went to the caretaker and we said, hey, we have this problem with mice. You need to fix it. And she basically told me get a few traps, and that was it. And I was like, this is your responsibility. This is not my responsibility. This is why they pay you to, or not pay. I don't think they were. This is why you get free rent, is because you need to take care of these things, and you're not. So then a few years later, a couple years, my husband was handling all of the traps with the mice. And then a few years later, my neighbors above us had a cockroach infestation. Like, this makes this place sound like it was a terrible place to live, and to some degree it was. To some degree it was just home, and for the most part we didn't have mice all the time, but there were like these periods that were months or years where we did. And our neighbors above us had a cockroach infestation, which also happens. Like, I'm not judging them because I live somewhere where cockroaches are all over the place. So like, I completely view it differently.
I'm not sure where you're based now, but if you're basically anywhere in the Northeast, anywhere in a city environment, Cockroaches are a thing. My last apartment, we had a pipe burst in the back room. So in the back room, it was adjacent to my neighbor's bathroom, and I didn't know. And so and that back room was empty for a couple of weeks until I went in there and I saw that there were all these roaches there. And I've never lived with roaches, but I mean, if you live in a city, you never lived with roaches, meaning you never saw them.
This is the worst part. They were doing exterior construction on the building. And this is how we know the mice were living in the walls. We were getting 8 to 10 mice in our apartment a week during the construction because they were pounding on the walls. And it was an invasion. It was just like mentally draining, like not even draining, just so difficult. And
I want to interject here. This was all at the same time that you were working from home, primary caretaker, and you had a toddler.
Well, I mean, by this time he was like 8 or 9, you know, like he was growing up in all of this. Yeah. So when it started, he was a toddler, but by this point, you know, he's a growing child. Yeah. So even just thinking about the mice invasion, I'm like, ugh. Yeah. That was the worst part. Oh, and we couldn't have, like, for me, my biggest solution to having mice would be, get a cat. Well, we couldn't have pets. And so I'm like, why are you forcing me to have all of these rodents in my home? And I can't even have a pet to take care of them. What is this? Yeah, so that was a whole thing. But yeah, so my husband ended up calling the owner, and I think it was kind of like off hours, and he was just like, you guys need to do something because we have all of these mice in here and it's from your construction and you need to figure it out. And I don't think they really did anything because we'd already given them our notice. And that was, I'll get into that. This was like the big reason that I contacted you. So all of this history of not doing anything in the apartment on their end, like, I mean, we didn't do maintenance because it wasn't really our job. We weren't necessarily like the cleanest of people in the sense that we didn't do cleaning on a regular basis, but we weren't like living in filth either, right? We didn't have trash everywhere or anything like that. They came in, and apparently we were supposed to clean the filter on the air conditioning or something. I don't know. No one told us we needed to do that. Like, I wouldn't think that's my responsibility.
I just want to interject here, and this is probably gonna seem like common sense stuff, but there are certain things that are common sense stuff that, like, unless you know, like, in my home growing up, my dad did all that stuff, and I might know, like,
yeah. And it's like, okay, maybe that was for me, but where's the line between maintenance and what I'm responsible for? And
no, the ACs, were they put in by the management company, or
it was like built into the wall, so it wasn't like a central air unit, but it was like a window unit that was cemented into the wall.
That's really interesting. And this was in Minneapolis, correct?
Yeah, like a little northwest of it. Yeah.
Not familiar too much about rental laws there. But I can only imagine. I know New York City, most people just have window units, and that's like, you put that in there, so you take care of it.
Yeah.
Like the building that has something in there, it's usually the maintenance of the building that does.
Yeah, you would think, because it was like theirs, and it was, cemented and everything. So whatever, we didn't do anything about it. Well, they came in, and I don't remember how this happened. I guess like they were going around saying, oh, we need to check these filters or something. And so they came in, and the owner came in this time, one of the owners. And we hadn't interacted with the owners a lot. It's weird. And I don't think I knew this until after, but I actually had like worked with their stepmom, like when I was much younger, and my mom had too. It was a whole thing. But basically they were like Nepo babies. They had inherited these properties, and they weren't really into maintaining them so much until they were. So at this point, we'd been there 9 or 10 years, and 10 years because it was the end. And so she came in, and I wasn't home, so I don't fully remember what happened. My husband and our child were home. She was upset about the state of the air conditioner unit, and I'm like, well, not my deal. It was there. You guys, if you wanted to know what it was like, you could have come in at any time and fixed it or done some maintenance on it. So she was yelling at my husband and my kid because we had boxes on the floor, because that's where do you put your boxes of books? On the floor. So she was mad about things being on the floor, which seems really weird because it's like, okay, well, I paid to rent here. I don't see why what I put on the floor should matter to you. And it wasn't in the lease. So, but she was yelling at my husband and my kid because we had boxes on the floor. And then after that, like, she just kind of toured the apartment, which we didn't know was going to happen. And so she was like peeking at things and stuff. And my kid, he's not a toddler at this point. He's old enough to know like what to do, but he threw something away into the trash and missed. And it was like while she was there. And then she yelled at him for throwing garbage on the floor. So she made my husband and my child, like, she was yelling at my kid while she was in my home. She made them feel really unsafe and uncomfortable in our home. And then, like, she gave us an ultimatum regarding the boxes on the floor. Like, we had to have it cleaned up by a certain amount of time, or like, I don't know what she was going to do. I think she was kind of threatening to end the lease at that point. And we were like, okay, well, we see the writing on the wall. I'm not going to sit here and stress about like meeting these somewhat arbitrary standards.
So just for clarity, at this point, you're currently month to month.
Yeah.
So I know in a lot of different places, once you're month to month and not an official lease, the standard is like 30 days.
Yeah.
Right? If we're giving you notice, that's also for raising the rent. So there's really like the only benefit that somebody would have being month to month is that that if you needed more flexibility in your life, you can always leave. Because I was a month to month my last couple of months at my last place in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Being down in DC. But that also gives an advantage to the landlord if they wanted to.
Yeah.
They make these weird ultimatums and be like, you know what, next month, unless it's rent controlled, I'm going to double the rent.
Yeah. And it wasn't a matter of I'm going to double the rent. It was we are going to terminate the lease. And so when it expires, we're not going to renew it, is the understanding that I had based on what she was saying. And we really suspected that. So when we got in to that place, like, we were paying under $800 a month for a 12-bedroom, and it was about 700 square feet, which at the time that we rented it was pretty standard. But, that was over 10 years ago now, and like almost 15 years ago, I think. And at the time that this happened, it was right around the time that rent started skyrocketing and property values started skyrocketing. So it was like that property was probably, or that rental property was probably worth twice what we were paying at that point. Maybe not quite, but they could have gotten at least $500 more. And so we think that they just decided that they no longer wanted us as renters, and they could get a lot more money out of someone else if they got rid of us. And so they basically put us into a situation where we felt that we were being forced out. And I had been in a partnership with another bookkeeper at the time, and I had just left that partnership and went on to start my own bookkeeping firm. And because of that, I was viewed as a risk for renting again, because I had just started my business. Apparently, like, it looked like it was a new business, even though, because it was a newly established business, even though I'd been doing that since for 5 or 6 years by that. Well, no more than, probably close to 10 at that point. So I was having trouble finding a place to live. No one would rent to us. And then everything was way more expensive than what we were paying. So we ended up living with my parents for, it was supposed to be just a couple years. We lived there from 2019. I guess it was still kind of within those parameters. 2019 until the end of 2022. And it wasn't ideal, but it provided us the opportunity to save and buy our house. And that was what we decided. We're like, okay, well, if this sucks and this is what we're gonna have to do, we might as well save and buy our own house. And so while it was a terrible experience, it led to this.
So I have a few follow-up questions. My question to you is, what was the most frustrating part of the whole rental process? If you could just sum it up, like, would you
while
say
we were living at that location, the most frustrating part was it felt like we weren't being heard. Like, we would, they had the caretaker. Well, when we first moved there, we had an awesome caretaker. Like, she was so involved in the community and she took it very seriously. Like, she owned that role. And then these other people came in and it was not like that at all. So we had a backup couple, like if the main couple left or was on vacation or whatever, like, we could go to the backup couple. And so sometimes it was well, who's responsible, like, who's going to take care of this, and it really felt like that was on us, and it felt like it shouldn't have been. So, and then having to track down the owners, which ended up not being a great thing either. Like, I just really felt like we were in this place where no one really cared about whatever needed to be done and especially the maintenance stuff.
So my follow-up question to that is, we talked a little bit about rental transparency and what that means. One, what does that mean for you? And then follow up to that is, how can rental transparency be better for you or better for, let's say, your son when he's, looking in the next couple of years of getting his own space because, mom and dad is not cool. And then, and just generally, what are some things to make the whole rental process transparent?
I think, ideally, being very clear with your tenants what their responsibility is for maintenance and what your responsibility as the owner is. So having that in the lease, having it very detailed in the lease, like who's responsible for what. If you expect that your tenants are going to do some basic maintenance, I think having that in the lease and having the detailed examples of what that would look like is very important. And transparency, I think having a deadline on a month-to-month lease, because I look at it like, okay, well, this is just going to keep renewing, which is great for me. But if you don't want someone to turn that into a long-term thing, like having this can go month to month until X number of years, something like that would be much more transparent.
Yeah, it's my awareness that month to month will only end when there's an agreement between the renter and the landlord or something. But it would have been nice to have some sort of like transparency around that for sure.
mean, they would have had like that amount of time, right? Like they would have said, oh, you have 30 days. And like we gave our notice and we had 60 days. But just knowing in advance that, hey, this was going to happen would have been a lot easier to deal with.
So switching gears a little bit, I want to ask, I like to ask this question to really get perspective around folks' experience living in a city, living in an apartment, less on the like what happened and more on the interactions and maybe the why behind it. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with New York City or even Baltimore, but there's been a history of things like redlining, and then we have the complex gentrification, and a lot of times that's race-based. And throughout the US and throughout the world, a lot of times that young women, single mothers often face discrimination for renting. So I wanted to ask you, do you think any of the interactions, do you think that there was any form of discrimination, or maybe you were treated differently because of the mixed race household? Just tell me a little bit about that experience, and if you thought that any sort of discrimination or otherism was a thing.
I mean, I think maybe. I think it was a combination of, we had a young kid. I think they just kind of viewed us as dirtier because my husband is Asian. And like they've never came out and said, oh, it's because you're Asian, but I think that was probably an unconscious bias, or maybe they were conscious of it. But I think that definitely played a role. I think a lot of it was a lack of initiative on the caretaker's part, and a lack of like, I think it was some issues with leadership and things like that in the company, and not necessarily completely motivated by bigotry, but I can't rule it out either. I think the fact that I didn't work like a traditional job because I was home, working from home, or going to clients, but you're generally working from home. Back when working remotely wasn't something that people did. Yeah, I think there were, and the fact that my husband was on disability, I think all of those things kind of played into it. And like I said, it could have been an unconscious bias. We never received any messages or communications that indicated that it was that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had prejudices that were, oh, well, Asian folks are dirty or things like that. We did have another family that lived in the building that were Hmong, and I don't know if they received anything like we did. But actually we had two other families in the building that were Asian. Yeah, and so I don't know if they had similar experiences or not, but we had been there the longest.
Yeah. So this question, this has been a really big question. I talk to a lot of renters or people looking to rent, but this also goes for people looking for homes to buy. So my question is how do you, before you moved in here, and then also after 2021, how did you verify the housing info? Like, how did you find, or did you look up like schools in the area, flooding history, history with the landlord, and then for your current property, did you look up something similar?
So for both places, we were kind of in a hurry. So that made me less. I mean, we did a lot of legwork here, the place that we bought. But the place that this place, I chose it. I don't remember why my husband, I think I made an appointment with the leasing office, and I think my husband had to work or something, so he wasn't with me. So I went and I toured it with my kid when he was a baby. And really, like, I kind of knew the area. I had grown up in that area. We moved from Minneapolis into the suburbs because I wanted to be closer to family with a little one, and it was cheaper. And so I kind of knew the area, and I was like, oh, well, these apartments are lower rent. They're not, it's going to be more affordable for us to live here. And so it kind of picked them out that way. And I didn't do a lot of other like investigation into it. I don't think I really thought that we were going to live there that long. I had wanted to get housing, but the economy was not great during that time. And so it's just like, I just wasn't getting to the point where we would be able to purchase at anytime during that process. And then when we moved here, we had a list of things. We didn't come here before we were like, this was not a normal like home buying experience. We were living with my parents and we were ready to leave. I love my parents. I'm so thankful that they gave us the ability to live with them. We're very much on different ends of the spectrum when it comes to politics and human rights and things like that. And so we did not want to live with them anymore. So we were in a hurry, but we also knew exactly what we wanted. And we picked Hawaii because we didn't want to live in a predominantly white space anymore. And so we just told our realtor, we're like, these things are what matter to us. Go. And he found it.
My last question for you, this is really an open-ended question, but I really want to know, is there anything else that might be important for me to know about your rental journey and your history and maybe what you want to see in the future? Is there anything that you missed?
Well, I feel like we really covered like what I think could have made like that situation better and how folks could be more transparent in the process. I know the work that you're doing is going to completely revolutionize renting and make it so much easier for folks to, because like I couldn't really leave a review on Google. I mean, I could have after, but we were very concerned about what would happen if I left a review. Like, would I be able, would that prevent us from getting another property if we needed to rent? Things like that. So having something that gives a little more power to the tenants, I think is going to be really, is going to do a lot of good. And I'm excited.
I am so excited too. I've always been really lucky to live in places that tenants had a lot of rights, but even in those places, there's so many things that you just don't know. And it's like information overload where you can't really find it. So I'm hoping that Houstory is a resource that people can use to really just make it simple and hold people accountable.